Hello, I'm Steve Price. Today I'm going to read a couple excerpts from a newly published book of outdoor literature. It's titled A Walk in the Park by Kevin Fedarko. And the aforementioned park is Grand Canyon National Park. And he's a travel and environmental writer, along with his photographer friend, decide that they're going to traverse the entirety of the Grand Canyon, not just the park itself, which is several hundred miles, but they're going to hike the entire thing. It's about 500 miles. There's no through hike, there's no through trail through the Grand Canyon. And it is one of the most dangerous and even deadly parks in the United States. So both these guys, Kevin and Paul, had a fair amount of hiking experience. Kevin worked on a river tour in the Grand Canyon on the Colorado River, but they're actually a couple of knuckleheads as well, and they are woefully unprepared for this adventure. So this is the book that Kevin has written. It came to my attention in the New York Times Book Review, and I grew up in Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, so I'm something of a desert rat myself. So that part of the world I have a great appreciation for. So I'm going to read a couple excerpts from the book, but first I'll just read something briefly from the review. A walk in the park is a triumph. Fedarko doesn't describe awe, he induces it. With page-turning action, startling insights, and the kind of verbal grace that makes multi-page descriptions of, say, a flock of pelicans feel riveting and new. The canyon has no established through route. It is a living oven full of scorpions, cactuses, venomous snakes, flash floods, and various other incarnations of hell on earth. So, I'm going to read from the prologue. Quote, "There are some good things to be said about walking. Not many, but some." That's from Edward Abbey, the author of a famous outdoor book called Desert Solitaire about his year in Arches National Park. Every now and then, I find myself confronted by someone who wants to know about the very worst moment when Peter McBride and I endured during the year we spent inside the Grand Canyon. And I'm forced to explain that addressing this query properly is no simple matter. So many horrible things happened to us down there, I point out, that it's almost impossible to single out just one, because really any of them could have qualified as the most wretched and intolerable of all. There was, for example, the afternoon I tripped and fell into a cactus, and the night I unwittingly unfurled my sleeping bag atop an anthill, which happened to be the very same evening that Pete and I toppled into the Colorado River with our backpacks. Or the morning after the snowstorm, when I was trying to thaw out my frozen shoes with our camp stove and accidentally set them on fire. And there was also the time the canyon got so bad that we quit and went home, resolving never, ever to come back. But then I admit, having given the matter due consideration, Pete and I now agree, and perhaps you will too, that the moment the wheels completely fell off the bus was probably when the rat burrowed under Pete's skin and started snacking on his intestines. This happened at a place called Ryder Canyon, one of hundreds of minor tributaries that branch off from the main canyon. And it unfolded during a time of day that I had come to despise more than any other, which was the hottest part of the afternoon, when the fleeting freshness of early morning was nothing but a distant memory. An evening's reprieve lay too far off in the future to even start dreaming about. A period of such incandescent misery that it felt as if a cackling, fork-tailed demon had flung open the door to the furnace of hell itself. The sun stood squarely overhead, straddling the canyon's rims, pouring a column of fire directly into the abyss and driving the shadows into the deepest recesses of the rock, while causing the cushion of air that hovered just above the surface of the stone to tremble, as if the ground itself were gasping for breath. But the most striking element of all, the detail that could burn a hole in the center of your consciousness, was neither the brilliance nor the ferocity of that heat, but its heft, its thickness, and weight as it draped itself over the top of your head and across the blades of your shoulders, as if it were a blanket braided from material that was already in flames when delivered into the hands of its weaver. It was the kind of heat that would slap you dead if you lingered in its glare for too long, which was why Pete and I were so keen to lower ourselves off the exposed ledge we'd been stumbling across for the past hour and drop into the bottom of Ryder to seek some shade. Getting there involved about 60 feet of down climbing through a steep notch with an overhang, and the first move required Pete to place his palms on the edge of the ledge, ignoring that the surface of the rock was almost too hot to touch. Then jackknife his body into the notch while scrabbling blindly for a foothold with his toes. I was kneeling beside him, poring over the lip to see if I could pick out a place for him to jam one of his feet into, when something on his backpack drew my eye. It was a miniature thermometer clipped to one of his shoulder straps, and as he shifted his body, the device caught the light and twinkled as if it were saying, "Hey, check me out." The column read 112 degrees Fahrenheit. That was somewhat shocking. It was nearly October, and the forecast had called for a temperature of a mere 105 degrees Fahrenheit. But it sort of made sense, too. Ryder's steeply angled walls, which comprise 5 separate layers of stone panning a color palette that runs from caramelized honey and braised butterscotch to unfiltered bourbon, are lined on a direct east-west axis. This meant that Ryder's interior had been hammered directly by the sun since the break of dawn, 7 hours earlier, long enough to turn the space between those walls into a kind of convection oven. The narrow patio at the bottom, however, was bathed in shadows and even featured a few small pools of water which linked to the next by a thin stream penciling between them. The scene looked deliciously cool and inviting, and Pete's progress toward it seemed to be unfolding smoothly until, without warning, he grunted softly and froze. We were now eye level with each other, which meant that I could read the expression on his face, a hazy suspension of shock, bewilderment, and pain. A quivering dollop of sweat the size of a pinto bean glided down the center of his forehead, skidded off the bridge of his nose, and fell onto the front of his shirt, already soaked with perspiration and encrusted in rings of salt, with an audible plop. He held himself in place for a moment before muttering something inaudible, then carefully hitching his body back up onto the ledge, where he leaned on his elbow and stared at me vacantly. "What's going on?" I asked, confused. He swallowed hard and tried to speak, but was unable to push the words past his lips. So instead, he lifted the front of his shirt, exposing his belly and chest. Protruding from the skin directly above the rib cage was a distended lump, and as I watched in horror, the lump began to move. It wriggled to the opposite side of his chest, then slowly descended down toward his abdomen. Then it wormed across his belly before turning again and squirming back up the side of his torso toward his shoulders. The lump was about the size of a bushy-tailed wood rat, a mammal renowned for its foul temper and a fondness for lining its nest with cactus spines. And it probably stands as a testament to just how poorly I was dealing with the whole situation that for several long seconds I found myself wondering exactly how an actual rat, a live rodent, had managed to tunnel his way beneath Pete's skin. This was nothing I'd ever seen before, a spectacle whose freakishness was intensified by its mystery. And the only thing surpassing my bafflement was an ardent sense of relief that whatever kind of rabidly deranged parasite this might be, it had seen fit to drill its way into Pete instead of me. Relief, I hasten to add, that was swiftly expunged by a swirling backwash of panic, laced with deep concern for a person who, yes, and true, was often profoundly annoying as well as a titanic pain in the ass, but who also happened to be my closest friend in the entire world. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I screeched. As it turned out, there was more than one answer to that question. So that's how the book is introduced. And then I'm going to read something a little more poetical, one of his descriptions. So this is about halfway through their hike, and they're coming to rest after a full day of hiking, which they could get as far as 15 miles a day. That night, we set our camp next to a small pothole out at the tip of a sandstone promontory where the uppermost ridge of the Supai fell almost 1,000 feet to a ledge at the top of the red wall, then fell again for another 1,600 feet to the river, now invisible in the evening shadows. At twilight, the wind picked up and blew hard for 30 minutes before dropping off abruptly, as if someone had pulled the plug on a fan. And amid the ensuing stillness, the heavens surrendered to a darkness more pure and more absolute than anything else we had yet encountered. By now we had ventured far beyond where even the faintest glimmer of artificial illumination crept into the sky from the hotels and gas stations on the south rim, while the lights of Las Vegas were still too far to the west to register on the horizon. This left us enveloped in something singular, because aside from the deserts of eastern Oregon, the Badlands of southern Utah, and a few isolated pockets in places such as Death Valley, no other part of the country can match the darkness that looms over this section of the canyon on a calm, moonless night just before the stars emerge. The first of those stars, the ones trailing the last of the twilight and riding the leading edge of night, little more than timid specks, trickling thinly from the headwaters of the heavens in isolated pairs and trios. But as they grew in number, they coalesced to form a celestial current that slowly built into a torrent of light as the constellations started winking open one by one. The soaring cross of Cygnus, the hot blue cluster of the Pleiades, Cassiopeia's bright and jagged arc, until abruptly and without warning, the great rushing surge of the Milky Way shimmered into view, and the entire sky condensed into an ocean speckled with silver. Astronomers will tell you that in the right place and under ideal conditions, no breeze to stir up the dust, no clouds to obscure the sky, the human eye can discern no more than 2,500 stars at night. But based on what Pete and I witnessed that night, this figure is absurdly low, because the stars that appeared above our heads were beyond counting. And as they tumbled down to the horizon, on every point of the compass, we took note of something else, too. Although each tiny fleck seemed to glitter like an iridescent jewel, some emerald, others sapphire or turquoise, their fire was anything but uniform. A few burned with a sharpness that made them seem close at hand, while others flared faintly, their luster dimmed by distance. This merging of proximity and remoteness imbued the heavens with not only radiance, but also with dimensionality and depth, transforming the sky into a vast inverted cauldron whose base was closely fitted to the horizon, whose sides curved upward into the inky lacquer of space, and whose interior was now filled with wraith-like tendrils of starlight that twisted and coiled, pulsing with a stately languor whose undulations were as subtle and imperious as the shimmering forms of the painted panel that we had seen that afternoon. This is what astronomers call celestial vaulting, the revelatory effect produced by the rushing awareness of two opposing impressions, the sudden apprehension of the vastness and the depth of the heavens, combined with the arrival of a moment of understanding that transmits in a single burst the tininess and the insignificance of Earth, as well as everything that moves or breathes upon its surface. This wasn't anything like the kind of night that Van Gogh had once painted, a candelabra of stars looming protectively over a sleepy cluster of tapering church spires, neatly planted fields, and sturdy farmhouses whose windows gleam with lamplight. This was a sky belonging to a time that no longer exists, a sky that has never been seen or even imagined by most people living in such places as Boston or Dallas or Los Angeles. A sky whose wildness can call forth and amplify the wildness of the land, and perhaps too the wildness within oneself, by offering up a glimpse of the darkness that our earliest ancestors once knew, back when humans must have lived in almost continuous humility and awe, transfixed by the inescapable sense of just how small and unimportant they were. Little more than tadpole shrimp or spadefoot toads, creatures unburdened by delusions that the world could be sculpted to suit their ambitions and needs. The kind of sky, the kind of darkness that will enable you to fully grasp for the very first time the true meaning of the word nightfall. Thank you for listening.